But I did want to draw people's attention to this, and I know that this has not necessarily been widely known, but if you know where to look, you can find some interesting things. Has anyone been to George Street in Sydney?
Yes.
And seen the light rail along there? So you would know that the light rail doesn't go very quickly along there, and for good reason, right? It's a busy street, it's pedestrianised, it crawls along there, and for the most part, it performs what job it's supposed to be doing admirably. It's a place-making initiative. It's not a mass transit spine connecting the southeastern suburbs of Sydney to Circular Quay. Certainly there are opportunities there to use a variety of other means, such as heavy rail or buses if you wanted to get there as quickly as possible. But for what it's worth, the Sydney project, as slow and torturous as it was to be delivered, functions admirably in terms of what's intended to do. But that gives an indication as to what the operation of Light Rail Stage 2 in Canberra would be if they decided to proceed with the Barton Dogleg. So what we have here, up in this top here, is indications of where there would be pedestrian malls around Barton. So just north of Canberra Avenue here, you would have one between Canberra Avenue and Sydney Avenue. You would have one here in between the DFAT building and what will be the future Australian Tax Office on Windsor Walk. And certainly further up here as well, where they're building the new $1 billion national security precinct with 5 different buildings and 10,000 office workers, there would be one there. And then there would be a pedestrian mall running for the full length of what is currently King George Terrace. Through there,
Sorry.
beg your pardon?
King George.
King George is the one in front of Old Parliament House.
Copy.
So going through there, as noted in the ACT government submission, light rail would be going at 20 kilometres an hour. It would be very, very slow. And one of the benefits of delivering Light Rail Stage 2, and certainly as evidenced by Light Rail Stage 1, is that it enables you to unlock millions of bus kilometres and distribute them across the network. It saw a incredible increase in the number of services and frequency of those services to previously underserviced places in places like Casey, for example, which went from having one meandering bus route to several. It was an impressive thing that was, beg your pardon? Several meandering bus routes, but nevertheless ones that have reasonable frequency. That was important, that was the trade-off, is that yes, you get some bus routes, but the frequency of those services is increased. That was possible because light rail was able to offer a comparative, in fact, significantly improved journey time compared to the old Red Rapid buses. I'm not sure how many people here used to traverse the Red Rapid bus back when it used to go between Gungahlin and City. Matt, what was it like?
An interesting journey.
Yeah, interesting.
Yeah, but it didn't have a dedicated line like we've got here. It didn't have a dedicated bus line like we have here. It was stuck in London, in North
It had some.
It was stuck in traffic.
Well, it started with dedicated stops as well.
Exactly.
And the traffic got stuck behind the buses on Northbourne Avenue because they didn't pull off. They just blocked a lane.
Indeed, and so this is part of the discussion that happens from this point onwards. It is a much harder argument for the government to say we're going to run it through Barton, we're going to run it at 20 kilometres an hour, and we're going to take away your buses as well. I think that's a really hard argument to make. State Circle, the time difference realistically between the R4 and the R5, and certainly where the R4 and R5 will be when they complete the Acton waterfront development and all the development around the city, journey time very comparable, 1 or 2 minute difference. Not the same if the journey for light rail traverses Barton. Damien, then Bill.
I just want to make a quick point of order.
Please.
Can people please talk into a microphone
Of course.
when speaking? Because there's people home online actually listening and trying to comment, and
Yep.
they can't hear what you're muttering.
Very good. Microphones, please. Damien.
What was that, Bill? Thank you. My understanding is I listened closely to what Minister Steele said at the meeting regarding the dog leg. And my understanding is that the reason for this is that they've been advised that there's a difficulty in building the light rail where it enters State Circle from Commonwealth Avenue. I think what we need to do is get some clarification from MPC on this specific issue. I think that would be useful. That would inform our debate.
We did ask for a representative from MPC to come to speak to our meeting today, and admittedly it was relatively last minute, about a week's notice, but obviously they were caught up with stage 2A and declined to comment. So we will certainly be discussing this. These are decisions which will be years in the future. Certainly there's nothing at this stage which is locking us into one way or another at this point, but it is worth being aware of the full series of facts on this debate at this stage to help inform any discussion that does occur. Gentleman at the back.
I was previously a very strong supporter of the Barton Dogleg, but in hindsight, I think that the State Circle route is probably more logical.
Yes.
Thanks. I don't want to get too down in the weeds here, but it would seem to me that the compromise solution is just to turn left at the lights at Coronation Drive, go behind Parliament House, hit King Street, hit Kings Avenue, and then hit State Circle. It gives you the best of both worlds, I would have thought.
It's funny you mention that actually, because I think, just to clarify, is this the one you're suggesting around there like that?
Well, I'd go behind Old Parliament House.
So they did look at that. Now, I do remember they looked at that, and for reasons that were unclear, I think to do with the Parliament House vista.
Well, you could...
Yeah, there's a range. No, but I think you're onto something. It's funny. The very first involvement I ever had in light rail stage 2, in fact, public transport more broadly, there was a consultation process undertaken in 2018, and there was the traditional your say approach, right? Go online, make some comments, have your say. I was the only person in Canberra to do a video submission about that. It was lovely when they did the summary of what we heard. One video submission received. That was from me. And I was suggesting something very similar to that, which was what I called Route 3, because it went boom, 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 shaped like a 3. It was also third Route 3. So yes, this is something which is absolutely the sort of thing that we're considering, certainly something I've been considering for a number of years now. And certainly we'd be interested in raising the options that MPC are considering, if indeed that transition down to State Circle is the key point of contention, whether they have to pursue the original route through Windsor Walk as well. Fiona.
Well, I just want to ask, what is the objective of the public transport system that's being implemented? Is it to move people from the suburbs into the city? Or is it for tourists, to bring tourists into the Parliamentary Triangle and the cultural institutions? There's not a lot of punters out there in the suburbs that are going to the cultural institutions. Sure, they're going to Barton, but you can get there from State Circle. It's not much of a difference.
No.
So I just wonder, what is the purpose of this? Are we moving people, or are we catering to the tourists?
It is a genuinely good question, and certainly it has been on my mind for a number of years now. Certainly there is always the future intention to deliver a light rail line along Kings Avenue as well. So this isn't we will never deliver light rail to that side of the National Triangle if we don't do it as part of stage 2. We obviously want to make sure that it's really, as you say, the objectives of the system are really clear. And certainly the government does not have a plan to expand Canberra's bus fleet beyond the expansion of the light rail network, which frees up buses. And it becomes very hard to justify that approach when the service offering that you'd be delivering with light rail in terms of time between point A and point B is so significantly different, and not in a good way. So certainly that's something that is concerning me specifically. I can't speak on behalf of the Public Transport Association here, admittedly. That's not a discussion we've had, but as chair of the organisation, someone who is quite down in the weeds and has been for years, I was there, giving evidence before the committee in 2018, with a range of maps that I dug up from the archives, looking at the Griffin plan and all those things and what he envisioned and Marion did as well. There are discussions that need to be had, absolutely, and certainly our approach has always been to be very upfront about where our position is as an organisation, and also make sure that we're working with the best available evidence as well. Gentleman at the back again. Sorry, I didn't catch your name, sorry.
John.
John, thank you.
Thank you. My cynical comment about tax revenue aside, which I think has some truth, but I think one of the actual main benefits that's coming out of this will be the fact that there'll be a stop at West Deakin. And a lot of people work there. And for example, I've thought about this a lot because there's a very good chance that my next job will be in West Deakin. I live in Mawson. At the moment, that is not an easy commute on a bus.
No, absolutely.
It's almost quicker to walk.
Yeah.
So, having that stop there, having the intermediate stops between Woden and the city, I think actually do add value. They're obviously going to slow things down, but, that obviously creates opportunities for more density around Deakin and Curtin and all that. But I just wanted to make that point that it's not, and of course there are people that live in Woden that work in Barton too.
Absolutely.
They don't all live in Kingston, most of them do, but some of them live in Woden as well. So I think there are you know, it's all about opening up options. And I'm as big a fan as anyone as an express bus from Woden to Civic, because it's very quick and it's very convenient. But there are some times when you don't necessarily want to go from Woden to Civic and everything else is 30 to 40 minutes.
Absolutely. No, and it is balancing those things as well. Yeah.
But you also do touch on that topic later.
Yeah, fantastic. Matt's got a question.
Oh, yeah, it's more of a... Oh, sorry, I've got projection. It's more of a comment, actually, because I find this talk about integration with the bus and the light rail rather intriguing, because at the current state, there's very little in the way of integration of buses. Like stops, there are very few stops proximate to light rail stops.
No, it's true. It's true.
And I will add another historical note of interest. One of the reasons I moved into Curtin when I did was way back in up till mid 2000s. There was they had what they called the 700 series, which were a number of buses that ran into the city in morning peak and out of the city in evening peak. And I was involved with the Curtin bus group that lobbied to keep the 700 series going, successfully twice, but unfortunately the third time failed. And it's a huge change of commute, having had a 15-minute express run from Curtin to now it's a 20 or 30-minute trip to the city.
Absolutely. And look, that's one of those key things where, in theory, transferring can be good if indeed those transfers are seamless, they're comfortable, they're safe, and the services that you're interchanging between are frequent. I was in Perth recently, and I had some of the most fantastic public transport experiences of my life, changing from a bus at Canning Bridge Station onto the Mandurah line, back and forth. I'm literally walking off the train onto the bus. Seamless, frequent, integrated. And that wouldn't have been possible if the services hadn't been timed appropriately, if the culture of the bus waiting for the train, if the train is running late, or vice versa, wasn't in place. And it works both ways as well. Walking off the bus onto the train, these things were all entirely possible. It was really good to see what a competent operator is capable of delivering when given those opportunities. But you're right, it is something that in Canberra we're not as good at.
Sorry, I just want to add another very interesting side comment to this about transfers. Way back when I was looking into, in detail in the Transport Canberra scheduling information, there was a little note that they said 800 metres is a reasonable distance from a bus stop.
Depends if it's uphill.
You've got an electric scooter.
That's right. Cool. Just want to very quickly touch on one other thing as well, which was in the Assembly this week in response to the usual fare from the opposition on light rail. There was an interesting little tidbit provided by the Minister for Transport about what the future Mawson extension to light rail stage 2 is likely to be. So this is not stage 2C as it turns out, but it is indeed would be considered as part of the build for stage 2B specifically. And what he was quite explicit about is the investigation doesn't stop at Mawson Drive at the Mawson Group Centre, but in fact the consideration is all the way down to Beasley Street, so opposite Torrens and Farrer specifically. The stops there are just indicative ones that I've been able to sort of extract from various documents that are surrounding the Athlone Drive duplication project, which are ongoing, but they give kind of an indication as to where things are likely to land on this project as well. So we'll watch with interest with this one. Certainly there's no commitment to actually deliver it, but there was, as part of the parliamentary governing agreement by the ACT Greens and ACT Labor, but certainly there was a promise to investigate it in this term of government. So the product of that is going to be quite interesting, and certainly we're going to hope that our colleagues at MPC will be able to present on the outcomes of that study at a future public meeting of ours. Fiona.
Back to the services. If Tuggeranong has to change at Beasley Street to get on, they'll have to, like, so, okay, so you live in Fadden, you catch your suburban bus to Erindale, you change onto your rapid, you get to Beasley Street, you change onto that to get to the tram. Never, when we see any of these things, do we see how the services will run. So, for example, will Beasley Street then have to become a big bus interchange for the buses from Tuggeranong? Will the Mint interchange have to be a big bus interchange for all the buses from Western Creek and Molonglo to feed through and stop and transfer onto the change. Like, we just never get any of this detail about how the services will operate.
I think I'll pass to Matt in a sec, but I would note that specifically with, we do know one tidbit, which is that the R7 and the R10 will continue with stage 2B. So there's no intention at this stage to have an interchange with light rail at the intersection of Cotter Road and Yarra Glen at this
So
point.
how do you know that? And you won't have a dedicated bus lane. You'll be stuck in traffic.
Well, that's right. So,
So,
I mean,
you know, that's not really very good public transport when you're stuck in traffic.
you telling me, Fiona, I face it daily, every day in Molonglo. It's an absolute
Well,
nightmare.
it's
Matt.
second rate.
So, in response to your question about what's happening with the Tuggeranese, no one else uses that term.
Nice.
New to me.
So, when the DA for the Woden Transport Interchange came around, in it there was a really helpful annex which talked about, and admittedly this was a couple of years ago, but Transport Canberra's thinking about what they would do in relation to Tuggeranong services. And the thinking was at the time that pretty much all Tuggeranong services, other than the deep 3 south suburbs, would go eventually. They would all go via Yamba Drive to Woden, and that would be the transfer point onto which they would change on. Once Light Rail 2B started, the idea was, and admittedly this was a couple of years ago, these things evolve, these things change, but the idea was that all Tuggeranong services would, either by Athlon Drive or by Yamba Drive, go terminate at Woden.
So
Wish I had a map to prove that.
I'd like to see then a map of the new Woden bus interchange that caters for all the buses coming from Tuggeranong.
I think it's
Because
actually on our
we-
website. Because we extracted those images, didn't we, Matt? It's on the PTCBR
And it
post about
tells
the
so
interchange.
how many. So it. All right. Where did you say it was? Because I want
On
to
the
know
PTCBR website, in fact, Matt, you'd be able to find the link today, but we actually extracted those.
how many services will be coming through that
Is
interchange.
this in terms of route numbers or buses per hour?
Both.
Okay.
What routes and how many an hour will be coming through. I want to just know that that bus interchange can handle it.
And that is actually a good point, Matt, and then Damien.
Yeah, so the whole document was Transport Canberra's modelling about how big a bus interchange do you need, what services would go through it. So we did a big piece about this a couple of years ago, reading through this. Happy to point you to that piece on our website. Don't know if you'll still be able to find the document anymore, like, you know, these things disappear over time, like the source document, but it was a good read. And, you know, I mean, I'm sure that when the Woden Transport Interchange came out, I'm sure you read all the documentation cover to cover. So
And this is why I have concerns.
yes,
Because it's very tight. You know, buses trying to move through, buses pulling out.
yeah.
No headway that you can. What do they call it? The buses have to.
You want to use the microphone.
Yeah, we want to make
What
sure
do they
that
call it? Head of.
Headway.
No, not headway. Anyway, what happened was the buses that pull in first have to pull out first because there's not enough room for the buses behind to pull out. It's all very tight trying to fit the tram lines, the buses through there. Anyway, it did raise questions in those reports about it.
Damien
And
and
I think as well, this is something we have talked about previously. But
yeah,
we are happy to talk about it in further extent, you know, another time as well.
that's right. Yeah, certainly, Damien.
Fiona, I think you're very much jumping the gun here, catastrophising about bus delays. I think that the Cullen Street to Beasley Street link, if it is a link, is probably an option in a draft business case somewhere being designed as part of the parliamentary agreement. There's also probably a Cullen Street to Mawson Drive option as well, and I would say that both of these options that are being prepared would have integrated transport designs or recommendations.
Yeah.
I think that the existing interchange that's been designed for Cullen Street is in far more detail because it's a far more considered plan. I don't think that there's any plan that buses would just stop at the side of the road and people would get off and get on light rail at Beasley Street. I think
Just
we're
want
well
to
ahead of
make
our
sure I got your
study.
name. Is it John? John, yeah. Do you want to just pass the microphone behind?
One other thing as well is we do cover this in upcoming topics as well. So, we're not starving you with this, but I thought I'd let you know.
Thanks, Murray. We'll just go to John now. Thank you.
I don't know if this is off topic or not, but one thing that I'm concerned about is the fact that the Callum Street interchange is actually quite a long way from the health centre, for example. And for anyone that has any form of mobility issue, that is a very long walk, and that there are no active bus stops on the west side of the Woden town centre at this point. Is that something? I mean, it could be very easily solved with a little little bus that goes around the hospital and does a loop of Woden, but is that a live issue, or has that been covered?
Bill, do you want to touch on that one?
Yeah, it's a very live issue. I come from Western Creek. I'm chair of the community council there. We are getting regular complaints ever since the Corinna Street bicycle thing happened. Support bike paths. I support separated bicycle paths. I don't support what they've done out here because it stopped the buses being able to access it.
This is the Carina Street bikeway you're talking about, Bill.
Now, I get regular commentary from people who go and get their cheap pharmaceuticals at Chemist Warehouse. They used to get the bus home to Western Creek and I imagine Canberra and all those places. It's no longer practical for them. They are now returning to driving. So, great, bit of infrastructure. It's ruined it for a bunch of people. I'm hearing similar complaints about down the health building end, Sirius, Aviation House. Launceston Street's been locked off to the Western Creek and Canberra buses. They now call it Western Creek Direct. Well, that's really good. Are we running a bus service for the sake of the operator or the passengers? I'll leave it at that.
And while we're on the subject, actually, I had my first proper experience using the temporary Woden interchange today. Used the 66 to Woden. It was nice. It was open to the elements in both a positive and negative way. Plenty of natural sunlight, which the previous interchange didn't necessarily have. But certainly my hike here was a little longer and a little bit more convoluted than I expected it to be. And certainly there's no shortage of helpful signage around, which is great to see. Whether it's temporary or permanent remains to be seen. But I'm curious as to everyone else's experience of the temporary Woden interchange, and potentially if there are areas that need improvement, what potentially the Public Transport Association could do to improve it. Got John at the back. Do you want to?
Yeah, because I haven't said anything recently.
Well, can you start with John first, please, and we'll come back to you, Murray.
Thanks. They've finally got the timetable signs working, but they're in just absurd places. They're so far away from anything of use that nobody can see them.
Yeah.
And now I don't have perfect vision, but I do have some pretty strong glasses. And it's impossible to stand at a bus stop and read what it's like. Yeah. There was just zero thought put into that.
I did try to see them on the way in, couldn't. So I'm with you, Murray. Then Matt.
Yeah. I am a big proponent and user of the bus interchange nowadays. I have noticed, yes, it is very far. This is, in trouble when you're accessing, places like Chemist Warehouse and things like that, and you want to make a bus on time. One other thing I noticed, yes, quite frankly, I'm annoyed with all passenger information displays across the network. One other thing is because of its somewhat square layout as observed there, it means that it does make things very far away in the sense that I'd say when the new permanent interchange is built, we'll spread those services out so they're easier to access and just able to walk on and off from wherever you're being. It's hard to explain, but how I put it, but yes. One other thing I've noted is this is one of the first bus interchanges to include fire extinguishers. I'm not sure exactly why.
Getting ready for the electric
And of
bus.
course, it's
Electric buses, yeah.
interesting architectural options as well are quite, well, they're shipping containers, basically.
Architects would call it an honest expression of what it is.
One other thing I noted is the sun as well, in the sense that you get a lot of that. I think it's west-facing sun in the afternoon, and it's hot, and you have to go in between the pillars and all that sort of thing. But I think they'll improve because of the shade of the new CRT. Anyway, I realise I'm rambling a bit, so yes, who was next?
Thanks, Barry. Fiona.
When you talk about transport, integrated transport and land use planning, it's a pretty fundamental thing that happens these days.
Ideally.
Yeah, well, in other parts of the country and the world, it does happen. But in Woden, I'm not so sure that we've got the integrated transport and land use planning, because while we're focused on the transport, and there is contested or competing use of the land for various things like public spaces and community facilities. So we've managed to get 2 bus layovers at Phillip Oval and on Eastie Street without a plan for where will be the public spaces and the community facilities. So I was in there this morning, the town square, and a fellow said to me, this place is depressing. So we don't have a plan for activating the place. What I find is that in our 2015 master plan, the town square was a part of the vision that, you know, Woden will service the broader region, it'll be a regional hub, and the town square will be a meeting place connected to blah, blah, blah. Now, in the new Woden district strategy, the town square does not even get a mention. The CIT work does not mention the town square for 6,500 students, which is just like 50 metres away from the town square. And so what is happening is that the activity is being dragged down onto Callum Street to where the light rail is. That's where that's where this new little pocket park is, north of the CIT. It gets sun, sure, but it's too small for events or for markets. It's a tiny little pocket park. And they want to bring the activity onto Callum Street. You mentioned George Street before. George Street is like, they've shut the buses, you know, they're taking the buses and the cars off. It's just the tram and the retail, same as Burke Street Mall. With the tram, no cars and buses, just the tram and all the retail. You know, like if they were to do that on Callum Street, that would be fine. And we could sit along there and there could be activity on either side of Callum Street if it was just the trams going through. But this is a major bus hub and they want to have us sit next to a major bus interchange. So the planning is really skew-whiff. And I'm not being alarmist. You do need to plan these things, otherwise you get crap outcomes.
Cool. How do you feel about the temporary interchange, Fiona?
Oh, stay on topic, Fiona.
Yeah.
Well, I'm not really that fussed. It's temporary. As I say, I'm interested in what the outcomes, the long-term outcomes will be. And the Callum Street and the interchange and sitting next to a bus interchange is a big problem. So the temporary bus interchange, okay, my experience of it is people are exhausted by the time they get to the plaza. I've spoken to Janet in Piccolo Mondo. She says people are struggling by the time they get from the temporary bus interchange to the plaza, they're exhausted. There's a lot, I stood there and watched, I was shocked at how unfit people are and how unwell they are and how much difficulty they are having in walking. But that's not going to change. That issue is going to remain with moving the bus interchange from the beautiful loops that we had down to Callum Street. They're going to be a long way away from anywhere.
Excellent. Thank you.
I think it should be noted as well that when the new CRT project is open, it'll probably have one of the most amount of public space and seating space out of any other town centre, and also the fact that within the CRT project, but as well,
please look again. This is
and as well when. Yeah,
all right, Murray, I'm going to cut you off there. Thank you. John wanted to have a say.
There'll be further development
Thanks.
in the space.
Is it on? No, it's not.
Now it is. Okay, thank you. Look, I think the temporary interchange as a bus interchange is actually working quite well. It's a lot more effective, a lot more efficient than the nonsense we were dealing with before that with buses, doing loop to loop. It is a long way away, but it kind of had to be. One of the concerns I have, and disclosure, I've just started a job in the Woden building, so I'm spending a lot of time around here. I have a dog that just went through knee surgery, so I'm literally catching the bus home at lunchtime and coming back. So one of the things that concerns me is the speed of cars doing that loop coming out of Grand Central Towers. Some speed humps are needed because these guys are not doing 20, they're doing 50. And there's no pedestrian crossing to cross what I think is probably Bowes Street.
Yeah, I know which one you're talking about.
There is right up at the end,
Yeah.
but that's just of no use to anyone.
Yeah.
The whole thing should be a shared space 10 kilometres an hour, simple.
That was my experience too, using it today.
And the people coming out of Grand Central Towers, they don't give a shit, obviously. They're just,
They should be catching the bus.
Well, absolutely. Yeah.
No, thank you, John. Look, we'll move on here because... sorry, Vicky. Yes, no, absolutely. Please do.
The length of the walk doesn't bother me, but the way that it is very narrow, it's quite dark, and it's got a couple of huge dog legs in it, which I find a little alarming. I got taken out just about by a woman with a double pram coming around the corner really quickly. I've used that interchange quite a lot over the last few weeks since it's been open. So that was one of the things that really, I just think that was good planning, kind of edging it along those buildings. The other one is the zebra crossings.
Yeah.
So the first time I used it, when it was open about 2 days, there was actually a guy standing at one of the zebra crossings. They're at either end of these long runs. And he was telling me off and telling me to use the zebra crossing, which I did. But another time, and I've been watching the people crossing, nobody uses the zebra crossings because they're in the wrong place. Yeah. They're right on the end, so nobody can be bothered to walk all the way up to the end in order to cross for your bus once you've found out where the stop is. And one bus I saw careering around a corner tried to take out these students who were walking in a big group, but it was unpleasant to watch.
Yeah.
And the other one was, I was going to say about the sun too. I've been stuck there one afternoon and the sun was beating down and it was horrible. Really horrible.
Yeah.
So I mean, it's not going to be a problem for the next few months, but how temporary is temporary.
Yeah, no, of course. And look, we're picking up some consistent themes here as well, just in terms of access from the temporary interchange to the town centre, or the centre of the town centre, various other things to that effect. Damien.
Yeah, I think maybe the PTCBR might like to make some representations around location of the zebra crossings and some of the access issues. I'll take the lead on that and
thank you.
Touch base with the committee during the week.
I'll admit, my first time using it, I didn't use the zebra crossings for the same reason. It wasn't intuitive to use. I didn't see anyone else using them either. People were just streaming over the street. Do we have any other comments on the temporary interchange? Because we've got some really, really good discussion here and some really good feedback that we can genuinely take. Andrew, take back to government.
I'd like to see just improved signage on the platforms. I've just found, like, when I've been navigating around, walking around there late at night, I'm still not familiar with the interchange. I still forget which platform my R6 leaves from, and I'm just walking around, and from some angles you just don't see what platform you're at and what routes are serviced at a particular platform, and I think that could be improved really cheaply.
Yeah, it's interesting how much new signage around the town centre there is, and yet the quality of it drops when you actually get to the interchange where it's most important. It's a little bit unfortunate. That's been absolutely fantastic. Thank you so much all for your feedback on that one. That was really, really useful, and just goes to show that my own experience today is not different from other people's as well. So that's incredibly helpful. Thank you. So, to touch on what's something that Fiona's raised today, services. All right, this is the thing that matters. Just to give a bit of a overview of where we're coming from. Certainly, just to use my experience, I caught the 66 today. It comes every 2 hours. If it didn't rock up today, which I've noticed the frequency of services has dropped just by 1 percentage point with the new network, but it's enough, I wouldn't have been able to make it here on time today. In fact, I would have not been here until about 20 minutes ago. And potentially if I miss tonight's service, I'll be stuck in Woden for another 2 hours. It's a lovely place,
Yeah.
lots to do, but
Go and sit in the town square. It'll be
exactly.
fun.
Well, I'll make sure to sit on the west side so I don't get roasted to a crisp. But anyway, the long and short of it is the frequency of some of the weekend services still isn't great, but I am keen to know, and Bronwyn, you might want to start us off on this one, and certainly I know, Andrew, you're also a resident of the Inner South. What is your experience with the services? What's working? What isn't working? And do you have any suggestions for improvements?
I've canvassed the Inner South Community Council and also some of the Old Narrabundah Community Council people, and the Inner South people generally got back with that they have a concern with the quality of some of the paths connecting to stops. I don't know whether that's something this group takes up.
Absolutely would, yes.
But they're pretty old. Some of the paths around the Inner South areas are pretty old already, so...
Specific stops.
Sorry?
I mean, we'll talk later, but if you have specific
Yeah,
stops.
specific. I will ask them for that, actually, because
Yeah.
sometimes they give you these very broad comments about things, so I'll get back to them and I'll say, can you give us a list of particular streets and particular stops? So that was a fairly general comment. I had a question from someone about what the general plan for public transport is for the Inner South over the next year or so, and I'm just putting that out there if there's some information that they can access.
Absolutely.
I had a question about, I've had representation from Oaks Estate about their transport services, because Oaks Estate still at the moment fits into the Inner South Community Council.
It does indeed. They're not served by a bus at the moment, are they?
Not-
Queanbeyan buses go there.
Queanbeyan buses go
Yeah.
there, yeah.
Yeah, so that's still the case. They're just serviced by Queanbeyan.
Yeah.
Do they have to actually go back to Queanbeyan?
Yeah.
And then, so they have to do a sort of a reverse
Yeah.
thing. Yep. So if there was
Not ideal.
there was a
Those buses are now on the Any Trip planners, the Queanbeyan buses. That's a recent upgrade to Any Trip. So it's not just Transport Canberra services. Now the Queanbeyan buses are on the Any Trip.
And we're always looking to ensure better integration between, interstate bus services, but equally it would be good if something in the ACT is served by an ACT bus.
Yep.
That would be good, yep.
Yeah, so that's still a bit of an issue there for Oaks Estate. I have an issue with the R2 is working really well. I just use it quite a lot on Canberra Avenue, and it's always very well patronised. So it's very successful. I have to say, when they initially changed over to Rapids, I was one of the people we were pretty upset about losing we had a bus 5, so we lost close access to Woden, but we had some representations to the Minister at the time, and we ended up with a service which I'm actually getting back home tonight, the 902, which connects Hume and Alexander McConkie Centre and goes through Narrabundah and down to Woden. It's not all that frequent, but it's there. So we did have a win there. But I found that since I'm now a convert to the rapid services, they're very good. We would still like in Old Narrabundah area a better access to R6. Because it's just at Narrabundah College, so Old Narrabundah is the sort of the Fishwick end,
Further around here,
around the markets, and bordered by Canberra Avenue and Sturt Avenue and Goyder Street. So it's a little pocket there where the Narrabundah shops are. We have difficulty accessing the R6 mainly, and we'd requested it stops at Griffith, then it goes through to Narrabundah College and just sort of barrels down Sturt Avenue. Could be a stop there. There has previously been a service there, 351 I think it was, years back. So there has been a service along there, so we're still holding out for a possible another stop there on the R6.
So, sorry, do you mind if I ask another question? So that's not a diversion, but just another stop on Sturt Ave?
Yeah, just a stop there that Old Narrabundah people can access, because a lot of Old Narrabundah people need to access Woden health services and things like that. My other issue was the R2 on weekends, evenings, terminates still at the railway stations. So it just means if you're going out somewhere on a weekend evening catching the R2, you get dumped at a dark railway station. You have to walk back about 15 or 20 minutes in pretty unlit areas around that old industrial area of Mildura Street. It's a bit dangerous.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I'm still not sure why, because on weekday evenings it does travel down. So the stop for us is Fishwick Mail Exchange. That's near the Fishwick Markets. That's the stop that services Old Narrabundah. And it's only one stop after the railway station. It's literally, 30 seconds more on the bus. Occasionally the drivers will take you that extra distance. If you say, look, I don't want to get out at the stop, at a dark stop, and some of them will say, oh, yeah, I'll just drop you down here a bit, and they will do it as a favour, but it's quite an issue really, and I don't see the point.
Yeah. Have the drivers explained to you why they stop at the railway station?
Well, they say, DFO's closed, but then it closes weekday evenings and it doesn't.
Yeah.
So, and they said they can't turn.
I mean, I'm not sure I believe that, but okay.
Yeah.
No, I believe you said. I don't believe that. That's a valid excuse for them to terminate.
So I think
half the route.
They could, for safety's sake as well, terminate or go down at least as far as the Fishwick Mail Exchange.
Yeah.
So that's an issue. I mean, we can pursue that directly from Old Narrabundah Community Council via a letter to the Transport Minister. I'm happy to...
That'd be great. If you could copy and share at ptcbr.org as well. I mean,
Okay.
we'll obviously, separately after this meeting, follow up on any concerns that have been expressed here, certainly, especially those which have been consistently and repeatedly expressed, but it'd also be good to keep a tabs on what's going on with that, because that seems to be, especially if there's no real logic behind it, at least not any obvious logic, a less than ideal set of circumstances.
Yeah, they could extend it. The last thing was there was a question from the previous chair of Old Narrabundah Community Council about how our bus services would be impacted by light rail 2B. I think he was saying, he was concerned that we wouldn't have a direct access into the city via a bus. We'd have to go in halfway, change to a light rail, and then go via light rail.
I don't think there's any intentions, at least, to be curtailing the inner south services that already exist down there.
Yep. Okay.
Certainly, they'd not be building new bus stops there if that was the case.
Yep. So that's about all my comment. Thanks.
Awesome. Thank you, Ronald. Thank you. We'll go Andrew first, and then Simon. Yep. Awesome.
I agree with all of those comments. Just about the things like fixing paths to the bus stops and making the bus shelters actually usable. That's again, I don't have any specific locations in mind, but I've definitely seen that around the place. I think we do need to talk about servicing, how we service Fishwick. Because like my housemate, for example, he works on I think it's Gladstone Street. On that northern end of on the Pialago end of Fishwick. And he used to occasionally catch the bus, not all the time, but he used to sometimes catch the bus to work. Now that side of Fishwick is only serviced by the 56, that's just not happening. It's not possible to get to that side of Fishwick in any sensible way using public transport at all, unless you happen to be coming from Narrabundah or one of those areas which happens to not nicely be in line with the 56. So there needs to be a plan for improving services to that half of Fishwick, and of course Derry Road, as has been earlier mentioned. Derry Road is a public transport black hole, which is absolutely horrifying. But
Thank you, Andrew. We'll go Simon and then John.
Before I said I used to work in Woden, I forgot. I work at the National Library now, so technically I am on the south side of the lake, just. So I catch the R2 and the R6 a lot. I complain about buses that are early and buses that are late very often. I don't bother with the R2 and the R6. The timetable is so fictional. I don't even bother. It's like, just turn up at the bus stop is the best I can do. And be prepared to wait. It's particularly peak hour buses, but lunchtime buses and stuff, it's just appalling.
Is there? Do we know? I mean, is it congestion? Do you know what the likely cause of those, magical mystery buses is likely to be?
The usual range of congestion. Bus drivers can't be bothered. Don't know.
I've heard similar things.
Yeah,
It's something I've noted as well. R2 always leaves late, but it makes up the time. I'm not sure about if it actually sticks. It never sticks. I'm not sure if it actually sticks to the timetable or not.
It would be good one day, and this might be a future PTCBR activity, is to find the reliability of individual bus routes, which are the worst offenders, which ones are more likely to be on time, which ones aren't. Simon, and then we'll go to John, and then Matt, and then Fiona.
Because I complain a lot, I have been on first name terms with the people who respond to me at Transport Canberra. They're always glad to get complaints because I understand there's some union arrangement that means they can't do regular analysis of bus driver performance or route performance. They have to have complaints in order to be able to justify accessing the data.
That's very interesting. I mean, surely this is something that could be dug up through FOI, yeah. So we've got John, Matt, Fiona.
Someone needs to write a bot that does complaints.
Website possibility, Matt?
A little Perl script. I wanted to pick up on the Fishwick thing. At the moment, the only effective way to get from Woden to Fishwick is the 831. It's actually really quite an efficient service, but it's $5 cash fare, and you can't use my way. And I think they're making changes to the 831 anyway.
Yeah.
I'm not sure what they are, but some sort of connection between Woden and Fishwick would seem to make a lot of sense to me.
Yeah.
Woden doesn't have a garden centre or a hardware store, and that's actually a live issue for me.
Yep.
I have caught the bus to Tuggeranong to go to Bunnings before. But that's a thing. Getting to the airport is also a thing, so that might be a thing. That there could be a bus that does those sorts of things.
Absolutely. Look, and yes, it's interesting. The closure of the Magnet Mart is a great loss to Woden, and it's interesting that you mentioned that there's not those connections to other services that are equivalent. So we can certainly raise that. Matt and Fiona, do you want to? Someone want to give Matt a microphone? Oh, sorry, Matt.
Oh.
Other Matt. Sorry.
Sorry. Yes, I must admit, as a Curtin resident, I'm slightly amused about these issues of Narrabundah because technically Curtin is like sitting in a transport desert. That if I wanted to go from Curtin to Fishwick, the transport service would take nearly an hour and about 45 minutes to go to Curtin Western Creek. And on a car, it's 10-15 minutes.
Yeah, and look, we'll come to that later because we do have a designated section for Woden as well. Fiona, do you have something to comment about Inner South? Because otherwise we'll move on to...
Oh no, I'll just re-emphasise that connection to Fishwick and the airport.
Yep.
Like the other thing, Inner South, we're talking trams. Where will will there be a tram that services the Inner South and connects to the corridor heading into the city? And will there be one from, how many trams will be hitting that corridor?
So my understanding, and this is again based off of the 2015 network plan, which is slightly modified by the East Lake draft place plan. So these are live discussions around precisely how many light rail routes there'll be through the Inner South. But the intention is that it will sort of connect just after the Kings Avenue stop at Parliament House, traverse up Brisbane Avenue, Wentworth Avenue, and this is the point where the live discussion is taking place over where it goes. So the draft East Lake Place plan, which if I can bring it up actually, here we go. So there's the prospect of it heading up Canberra Avenue in the usual way that the R2 does. That's the default way of going about it. The alternative is having it sort of turn off there, and it's shown here as almost a fork actually. It's a split in the service, not an alternative, but there's the prospect of a light rail service, then turning off Wentworth Avenue and then utilising part of the existing heavy rail corridor to provide that better service to Fishwick.
But heading north, heading north out of the Inner South, where will it hit the main corridor heading into the city?
So it'll hit the existing light rail 2, or the proposed light rail stage 2 corridor at, and unfortunately I don't have, actually I do, funnily enough. Just here, actually, at the intersection of Brisbane Avenue and State Circle is where the current the fork is intended to be. Junction. There we go.
And I'm just curious, how many trams will be using that stage 2B?
So I wish I had the photo with me, but I actually have a graphic where I've done up how many trams per hour would be operating on the individual corridors.
Coming out of Malonglo, Western Creek.
Yeah, actually the entire network. Actually, I did the numbers. I ran it on the calculation that the main corridors can, have around as however many services per hour. Like I've done the work, I don't have it with me here today, but certainly at some future stage I'd be happy to share that work and get a really good breakdown as to what the service pattern is for the future of the city on, hypothetical terms, if we were to use stage 1 as a base case, instead of just where do the lines go, because it's not just about light rail lines, it's about services as well. Damien, and I think we might then move on to Tuggeranong if we didn't have any more comments about the inner south.
Yeah, Fiona, the maximum frequency of the existing services is about 20 services an hour into Allinga Street, and I would say that, and that's peak
That's
hour.
every 6 minutes, yeah.
Well, 20 services an hour is every 3 minutes.
Oh, 3 minutes, sorry. Yeah.
But if you look at places like Melbourne, where you have Swanston Street and Flinders Street just with trams continually coming and going, I think that, future light rail network in place, and there'll be crossovers as well. I think that, 20 to 40 services an hour is entirely realistic.
Yeah, but you've got that from Woden, from the inner south, from the west as well. So that's 20.
Can we just bring this onto buses rather than light?
Yeah, I promise I will talk about this at some point, because actually I think I might even be able to dig up the graphic for you this evening.
You're also asking us as the Public Transport Association to answer a question that you should really be directing to major projects.
Thank you, Damien.
Something that I think that you should be thinking about.
Is something I thought about, or is something work I've been done. We'll be able to talk about in great detail at a future date. Or you could become a member of PTCBR and see the graphic on our members forum. Very exciting. Tuggeranong. Look, Murray, I'm happy to give you first punt at this one, because I know you've been patiently waiting for this discussion, but equally very keen to know, we often hear talk of Tuggeranong services being suboptimal. And I'll just put my experience on the table. I've got, parents that live in Fadden. I can catch the R5 down from where I work down to Erindale. I can then hop straight on to service, which provides me with a bus stop that's within 5 minutes walk of where they live. That's my experience. I know that there are other places in Tuggeranong where the service isn't as good, and I'm very keen to hear any discussion today about possibilities of improving the service as it presently stands. Murray first.
Thank you, Ryan. Thank you, Ryan.
Yeah.
Didn't have anything prepared. I haven't really been thinking about it actually, but
that's not true.
One thing I have been thinking about, particularly recently with services to Tuggeranong, is this does touch on light rail a little bit. There's a certain politician going around saying that the people of Lanyon Valley don't want the tram. What I think in response to this is, so even though it doesn't directly affect them, what it will mean is that all the local routes in Tuggeranong would propose to see a frequency increase of 15 minutes. Now this does every 15 minutes, so this doesn't seem immediately like a big deal, but what it means is that if you're stuck out, in places like, Call and Theodore only have one route for most of it, doesn't mean you have to rely on, pretty much planning your life around having, around 30-minute increments. And it would also mean that we have increased evening services as well.
Excellent points, Murray. I'll bring to a specific issue, because this gets raised with me all the time, partially because I have a cousin who lives in Canberra, but we actually received an email on it recently, and that is, where do the Canberra services go? So for the longest time, in fact, I'd say since bus services started operating in Canberra, what is now essentially the route 70 and 71 went around Canberra, east and west, and then went straight to Woden. As part of Network 19, that changed. Those services stopped going to Woden and started going to Western Creek. The logic behind that decision, which has annoyed a lot of people, because I hear from them quite frequently, as it's the number one complaint about Tuggeranong bus services I hear, is that has disrupted travel patterns, which is fair. If you've moved to a place, you've lived there for 20 years, and the bus services remain a constant static thing, and it suddenly changes, that is genuinely frustrating. And I fully appreciate that. The government's logic, which they've explained to me, and I'm not a resident of Canberra, so I can't, comment on the validity or otherwise of that complaint, is that, or that justification, is that the off-peak patronage on the 70 and 71 is very good, because a lot of people from Western Creek are coming down to Canberra. And likewise, you get people, instead of wanting to shop at the local Canberra Woolworths, which I understand is not the best Woolworths, they want to instead shop at Western Creek Woolworths, which is slightly better. That's some of the logic that I'm hearing. But do we have any residents of Canberra here this evening? We may well indeed. So
I just wanted to note as well, one of the other proponents of making it go to Coolman Court was because they were going to upgrade the Woolworths and close it, so you could alternatively shop at Coolman Court instead. One other thing that should be noticed, I do actually, after a while, reluctantly, I do agree with the changes in the sense that it gives you more options in terms of if you're coming from the city, you can catch the R7 and then instead of having to go through Woden to get from,
Fiona.
I think that some of the problem with Tuggeranong is the having to change onto the R4 and the R5. Like, you used to be able to just your bus used to feed out of the suburbs and go straight into Woden, and some of them continued on to the city. Now you've got to get to either Corwell or Erindale and then change onto a rapid to then get to Woden. And then once the tram comes, you'll have to change again. So, the number of changes is problematic. And I know you just said that you see your parents in Fadden and that works, but when you're on your way home and you change from the tram to the rapid at Woden and then you get to Erindale, it's the wait. How frequent will the suburban buses to Fadden go? Like, how people get tired and changing. I just don't think it's conducive to attracting people to public transport.
No, and that's one of the things Murray was touching on earlier, is that as part of the theoretical benefits of increasing the capacity of the public transport network through the introduction of frequent light rail corridors, is that those buses can be freed up and improve capacity on the network more broadly. As part of the Woden Interchange DA, as Matt alluded to earlier, the plan is that when light rail stage 2B starts operating, that every single local bus operating in Woden, Tuggeranong, potentially across the city, will be able to operate at 15-minute frequencies during peak periods. So obviously that would then translate to a half-hour off-peak frequency, which is useful. And it is an improvement on the best. As I said before, my local bus, the 66, comes once every 2 hours on weekends. Every 15 minutes would be a godsend. So you're right, frequency is absolutely important, and certainly that's why we're really interested about what the service pattern is for the bus network following the delivery of light rail stage 2B, and that then influences what shape and purpose light rail stage 2B takes. So we'll then go to John after
I just have one other thing to say about it. Another option is, rather than having to transfer at Cornwall and Erindale onto the Pink Rapid, is that those buses from Tuggeranong do like they used to and all feed back into Woden up that Pink Rapid corridor.
Yep.
And then that way you don't have to change and it's a lot more bearable.
Yep, that's very fair. John?
Thanks. I have a very specific issue, but it's also a very easily resolved one.
Excellent, that's what we like to hear.
Yeah, because Woden doesn't have a swimming pool anymore, I go and swim at Lakeside in Tuggeranong, and getting from my house, which is walking distance from Athlone Drive, down there on the R4 is absolutely fantastic. No problem at all. It's less than 20 minutes door to door, because there's a bus stop at the pool. There isn't a bus stop at the pool coming the other way, because the R4 goes around Tuggeranong and then Athlone Drive, and the closest bus stop is actually north of Learmonts Drive in Canberra, which is about a kilometre away. So stick a pole in the ground just after the lights, Anchorage lights, put a sign on it, say this is an R4 bus stop.
Yep.
Even make it an off-peak bus stop, maybe just, it's going to be used about 3 times a day, but it would actually remove because you actually have to go back to the Tuggeranong interchange, wait for an R4 and come back.
That's a north side stop you need?
Yes, northbound. I'm happy to send you a quick email about that.
Write that down.
It's just a really simple fix.
Yeah.
And it's a lot cheaper than building a new pool in Woden, but I'll be taking that up with them separately.
Absolutely. And look, on the subject of Woden, are we okay to move on to Woden, Western Creek and Molonglo services?
I think Matt had one more.
This was just on behalf of PTCBR member Louise Crossman.
Yep.
But it's sort of Southside generally. It's just access to Barton from the Southside is terrible. The 59 is a good bus. It leaves every 15 minutes. But when you're talking about, being able to change and transfer, that can actually be quite problematic.
Absolutely. Woden, Western Creek and Molonglo. This is obviously going to be an interesting discussion, but I generally am keen to hear people's thoughts. Once again, I'll start off by saying I catch the R10. It's an awesome bus. It has been very reliable up until the latest network updates, and it now really is kind of a gamble as to whether my service rocks up, and likewise with the previous one as well. So there have been more than one occasion now where my bus is significantly more crowded than expected because the previous service has been cancelled without any notice. So I'm not sure what the go is there, but that's certainly my experience of the latest network update has been a significantly reduced reliability on what at least should be a fast, frequent and reliable service.
I think the R6 should keep going through to Western Creek into Molonglo even. Extend the R6.
So this is, Bill, I suspect this is something you'll have an interest in?
Yeah, I'll start with my list. As a regular traveller on the 65, the 66, the R7 and the R10, as well as somebody who does transfer to the R6 or whatever the other bus that gets over to the hospital and do a bit of voluntary work over there. And occasionally I wander over to Kingston Foreshore to visit my favourite shop, but we'll leave it at that. Where are the problems? Well, what are the good things first?
Yep.
The good thing is the R7 is fantastic. Best bus service in the country, I reckon. Never full of people. Always get a seat. Very rarely gets held up by traffic. There's a bit in the morning, but we can work around that. That's the problem of having a car-based city. Streets will fill up. But it connects perfectly with the light rail. I go over and do a bit of this and that over at Dixon. I can get from Holder to Dixon in half an hour on public transport. So that's the first thing, it's good. But the problems, weekend. For some reason, the services going to the city on the weekend are great. They integrate perfectly. We get a 65, connect to the R7, wait about 2 or 3 minutes, along it comes, off we go. Coming home, the connection time's an hour and 58. Yeah, every hour. All the services come in, you've got an hour and 58 for connection. Other things that go on, services just don't show up. It's an information desert out there unless you've got an app. A lot of retired people do use the bus, fortunately. I hate to see them driving, some of the things I see around there. But the point is, they make the effort, they go to catch the bus, they go to Woolies, take their shopping over, and they sit in that shed at Western Creek until the bus comes that's got the right number on it. How many times have I had to say to somebody, look up on the AnyTrip app, your bus has been cancelled? It happens more often than you'd like to see happen. Now, the connection to Woden is a disaster. People have all but abandoned Woden. I don't know what they were thinking when they went to one stop in Woden.
This is the loss of the stop in Carina Street you're referring to.
Carina Street, now Launceston Street. Sorry, there is another stop just outside the Southern Cross Club. If I was coming from Western Creek, I'd get out just behind the Southern Cross Club. Going home, I've got to walk all the way over those sheds. That's fine, unless you've got some gear. Now you think about, and we've been active in the disabled space lately, in the DDA reforms, they're talking about silent disabilities, hidden disabilities. 20% of the community does have a disability of some sort. These people are just saying, all too hard, I'm staying at home. These are the sorts of things we think about. I don't know what they were thinking about when they hit us with the change.
Again, this is the Carina Street changes.
The Carina Street change, the Woden, the general Woden change.
So when you say general Woden, you mean the town centre specifically?
The town centre specifically.
Okay,
There's 3 changes, not 1. There's the movement of the interchange and demolition of the old one. It's temporary, we can live with that. There'll be something better there, we hope. Launceston Street. There's about 5,000 people down that end of town working away. In wintertime, they'll be spewing. Or they've taken their cars into town. Someone built a multi-storey car park down there. They knew what was coming. Taking the buses out of Carina Street, that's just absurd without putting a stop on Hindmarsh. Hindmarsh? No, Melrose.
Melrose.
They made no allowance, no thought about it. And we do know for a long time the bus drivers haven't wanted to service that stop.
The Carina Street stop?
Yeah.
Do you know why?
Too narrow.
Too narrow, inconvenient. So they made it narrower.
Well, it's also grid lock at the time because of the entrance to the car park.
Yeah, true. So moving on from there, I see promise in Woden when thing happens. The other thing missing is the connection to the hospital.
Yes.
Okay, you've got to change to get to the hospital. Okay, I can see a whole lot of other changes I've articulated in the past. A bit of tinkering here and there, no extra investment, and the services can improve a lot. And we can talk about it another time.
No, that's really good. Now, the hospital's been one on our radar for a little bit. Used to get a very convenient bus stop. Anyone familiar with the pre-Canberra Hospital expansion stop? It was right in the middle, very convenient. The new Canberra Hospital expansion obviously terminates the road that used to traverse through the middle. They've taken the bus out of the hospital precinct and plonked the main rapid stop on Yamba Drive, it's not ideal. And we've been really explicit about wanting to, and certainly the master plan for the hospital precinct suggests that there will be stops in the middle of the hospital at some point, but as we're very familiar with by now, master plans are fantastic, but actual delivered outcomes are an entirely rarer beast. And so we've also been very explicit about the hospital renewal in the north side around Calvary. We really want to make sure that they do a better job of integrating public transport into that renewed precinct than they have done with the expanded Canberra Hospital in Woden. Matt?
Yeah, okay. Again, being a Curtin resident, of course I've got to talk from a very biased perspective, but all these rapid services are a great, like watching a motor race, because there's absolutely nothing between either Western Creek or Woden and Albert Hall. And like logically, the R7 or R10 could stop somewhere near the Yarralumla wool shed.
Yep.
And the point on that is that there is a LDK village development underway. Yet there is no indication of any stop, and I've seen all this talk about the light rail stop on Adelaide Avenue, but the problem is, when's that going to arrive? In the meantime, again, the Curtin, Lyons, Hughes area is a transport desert.
And so on the subject of the LDK development, that was something that both Bill and I were quite vocal about in our various other hat-wearing capacities. We explicitly called for, as part of that approval, for a bus stop to be installed, with obvious connections to that northern part of Curtin as well. Now, unfortunately, and we want to talk about what role does the NCA have in improving things, they said, not our problem. Not going to forget about it. It's the first time I've ever seen a development application go in that referenced a transport study that wasn't actually provided as part of the consultation process. They provided one later, not for public viewing, of course. It was part of the private assessment process, but that's something we are very familiar with and something we have been pushing for and will continue to push for, because that's going to be a problem when that building is finished. It's going to be a traffic snarl and a half, and the very least they can do is plonk a couple of bus stops there to make sure that the R7 and the R10, which are barreling up and down there every 15 minutes, so it's sort of every 7-minute service, you're actually able to service that area, the people who live there and the workers who will be working there as well. Fiona?
I'm just wondering what your views are on, like with the densification along the Yarra Glen and Adelaide Avenue. What do you think is going to happen to the traffic speeds? Because at the moment it's 80 kilometres an hour, and once the light rail stops go in and there's densification, and if there's driveways going in, is it going to be more like Northbourne Avenue, or do you think that 80 kilometre an hour speed will be retained?
Look, no.
Because that will all impact on your bus services going in. It'll slow it all down if it's slowed down.
Sure. And look, all of the documents I've seen have never considered Adelaide Avenue as anything other than a limited access freeway. Same with Yarra Glen. Even the latest work on the Curtin Horse Paddock Diplomatic Estate isn't indicative of driveway access from Yarra Glen. Clearly there seems to be some sort of proposal for an additional sort of entrance into that precinct by the current intersection with Dudley Street. So where are we? Sorry, it's very hard to see on this map here, but kind of around here. So I don't see there, and I certainly haven't been privy to any plans that suggest any change from where what the current road environment is. Whether that is subject to change in the future as part of the change area process forecast and flagged in the district strategies, separate matter. But certainly I've never seen anything that's indicative of significant changes in how that is conceived as part of the delivery of light rail to Woden. Bill?
Look, Fiona, I think we have to face the reality. Look at St Kilda Road in Melbourne. It's going to be intensified, densified. There's going to be people there. It's going to be activated. It's going to be quite exciting. I am really looking forward to getting off my R7, transferring to a light rail there, popping in and having a drink or a coffee in a bar there, maybe going to a bit of music at the Deakin Mint interchange area. I think it's going to happen. I think we have to accept it, and we may even see it in our lifetime.
Yeah, no,
Maybe.
I'm just wondering what your view is about what will happen to the corridor as
Yeah,
far as access.
Look, one of the things we were quite clear on in our submission to the district strategies is more information, more detail. Those plans that were put out as part of the consultation process were vague, unclear, and scared a lot of people. One clear example of that was the fear that there was a bike path through Curtin that would be lost as part of that change area. That was never the case. That could have easily been cleared up with a map that didn't suck, but they provided a terrible map. People got frightened, communication was poor, and thus it was just an entire disaster for EPSDD on that front. So that's one thing we're quite explicit about, is if we are going to be making these significant changes, don't provide us with maps with a bunch of funny coloured arrows on them. Give us something that's a little bit more concrete, gives us a little bit more detail, and that gives us a much clearer indication of what we can expect as part of those change areas.
Does anyone have any final comments? Great.
Oh, awesome. Look at that. 6:01.
Nice work.
Look, thank you very much, everyone. This is obviously a Southside one. We will do a Northside one. It will be before the 11th of May. So as part of that, we are hoping to get Major Projects Canberra, possibly the NCA, to come in and talk us through the works approval for Light Rail Stage 2A. And likewise, we'll be running through each of the Northside districts so people can have the opportunity to talk about what their experiences are with Northside public transport as well. I wanted to thank you all so much for providing your feedback today. There's been a lot of really, really interesting material here. Some obviously longer term things that need fixing, but also some really good short term wins that could be achieved if the government applied themselves. So we'll be obviously taking this feedback on board as part of our advocacy work. Obviously we're in regular communication with the government. They don't always listen, but the least we can do is provide them with your feedback that you provided today, and that way they can't say that they weren't told about these issues, because the government, I get the strong impression, actually doesn't want to do a terrible job, but sometimes they don't necessarily get the feedback directed towards the right people. Fiona?
I have one last question. Do you know another city in the world that uses light rail as the backbone, as the commuter backbone that I can look at?
Again, it
What's
depends.
that one in America?
Calgary is one example.
No, they've got heavy
No.
rail.
Seattle,
Ottawa.
Denver.
Ottawa.
And
Yeah,
they don't have heavy rail at all?
there's no heavy. I mean, there's a heavy rail station in Ottawa, but it's it's the Kingston station.
Okay.
Look,
No,
there's
there was that one in America who did it first in the 90s. I can't remember.
Portland you're talking about.
Portland, yes.
Exactly. No, there's a lot of examples to work with.
Okay.
And essentially, it's just in the context of, actually, and while we're talking about transport-oriented development on your previous question, we are looking to get someone in from a key architecture firm. If we're lucky, we might get someone from Hills Tallis to come and talk to us about how to do transport-oriented development right. I think there are plenty of examples of it not being done so well. And it's really good to get some people who really know their stuff to come and walk us through what can be done if the right moves are made. So that's something that we're looking forward to doing later on in this year. And if you do have any other suggestions for public meeting ideas, please drop us a line. And likewise, with any further feedback you might not have provided today about suggestions for improvements to public transport on the south side, let us know. Contact us at chair@ptcbr.org, and we'll do with it what we can and hope to get quick wins and longer term wins as they come. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
So what's Damien?
It's Portland and Ottawa.
I was at 24.
They've moved the previous girl.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I think it's a really useful suggestion. It was excellent. Yeah, it was really
Much appreciated.
Look, it'd be good to, if you are able to get any more detail from the residents as well, let us know. We can, because again, you can go through Fix My Street, but also, you know, we can also discuss
So
it.
I'm
Yeah.
What did you do with
That's right. And if you heard anything more about the community reference group for stage 2B, okay, let me know if you do. Lovely.
Thank you so much.
Yes, no, that'll be really
And they also check out how we feel.
You lose some, and your bus is the same for 15.